Hello, this is RCKY, the Android guy. Alright guys, so today I'm bringing you a segment of Android Cast. Android Cast is just when I give my opinions and just what I or my kind of what I'm thinking about right now. So the real thing I had to address is just this is going to be an iOS rant, or iOS user rant, rather, because I've had since I compared the Galaxy S3 and the iPhone 5, I had so many people, iOS users and fanboys, say, "Oh man, you're so biased," and "Oh man, you don't know what you're talking about," and da 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 da, da, and just all these reasons. Now, the reason why I have to rant about this is because maybe I might be biased. I'm not going to deny that. I never have denied that. But I do try to be fair in the aspect that what I try to do is kind of expose the problem online for most reviewers, and that is most reviewers are iOS fans first and Android fans second. So what we get a lot of the times is they don't know how to use Android. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen reviewers from even big companies like Engadget, TechCrunch, Mashable, all these different companies, and their reviewers do not know how to use Android. And they know how to use iOS, and because of that, iOS always comes out looking better than it actually is. So one of the reasons I got the iPhone to begin with was to show that, like, well, I know how to use Android, and I spent a good amount of time with iOS, so I can actually do a good review comparing the two. But I actually go to the extent to learn iOS and use it properly so that those comparisons can be fair. The one thing I always cannot stand about iOS users, though, is they do not do their research. Now, this is a given for me at this point. So I've long since learned one really good quote that well, I don't want to call it a really good quote, but a good quote that I made a while back. And that is, of course iOS users don't do their research, because then they wouldn't be iOS users. The reason why I say that is because there is a lot to iOS, don't get me wrong. It's very simple and very basic. But people that do their research will often go with Android over iOS. Why? Because it's a better operating system. You can say what you will, like, I know you guys are like, oh, Android crashes and everything like that. Actually, Android crashes statistically less compared to iOS. And that's been more apparent with the newer iOS operating systems. This is the difference between the OSs. Just to get this crashing thing out, because I know I'm going to have, oh, well, what do you mean? iOS never crashes. Okay, so this is the difference. The newer iOS gets, the more it crashes. The newer Android gets, the less it crashes. So if you are a person that used to use Android 2.2 or 2.3 or used Android basically a year and a half ago or a year ago, then you probably had a lot of crashes. If you are a person that is currently using Android, you hardly experience any crashes, if any at all. However, if you are on iOS, I know for a fact you're experiencing crashes. Why? Because I have used the latest iOS devices, the new iPad, and the iPhone 5 personally, and within the first day of using both of them, they both crashed on me. So the thing is, the iOS users often don't understand what a crash is on iOS. A crash on iOS is when your app goes back to the home screen unexpectedly, and you just tap the app again and think that, oh, well, I don't know what that was, but I'm just going to tap the app again. That is a crash. On Android, apps actually because of how Google is, they actually tell you, look, this app has crashed. Please send us feedback so that we can send this to the app user and they could fix it. Now, the reason why iOS has more trouble with this also is because the updates have to be overseen. So, for example, say an app like Netflix, okay? Netflix has a certain bug when you click this one movie. It tries to load it and it crashes. So, just that's the bug, right? On Android, Netflix is free to actually update it and push the update right away. So what that happens is that the updates gets updated right away on Android, and then it's fixed. On iOS, Apple typically, not always, some few app makers have this bypass. However, most app makers have to get the update approved. Now, this is because Apple is closed source. You'll hear all the Android people that love Android like say, "Oh yeah, it's because it's closed source and all this kind of stuff." And why the iOS users will say, "Oh, well, it's for security purposes. We don't want people doing this to us." But the end result is that that bug fix takes longer to fix on Apple than it does on Android. And that's one of the main reasons that the newer iOS is, the more it crashes, and the newer Android is, the less it crashes. Android's only issue for the longest time was stability and speed. With Android 4.0 and especially with Android 4.1, that issue has almost vanished. Apple's issue is that they're too closed off and that they just are stale at this point. They haven't changed. That has not changed, and that I don't see changing very in the near future. So this is one thing that I just really get annoyed by with iOS users. And I know I was kind of rambling on, but I wanted to clarify some things because I know I'm going to get all these, hits like I always do, like, "Oh, whatever, douche," or, all this kind of stuff. And people are calling me all these kind of things and everything like that. Honestly, most of the time I don't even reply to it because it's just not worth my time. The other thing is that I study iOS very well. I actually know usually more about it than almost every iOS user I've ever met. Every iOS user, when they try to challenge me, I do a very good thing. Know the debater, or know everything they're going to tell you so that you can counteract it. And I, for that reason, know almost everything about iOS statistically. I also know the interface very well, and I have learned very well how long it takes to do things, the limitations of it, and everything. Now, I know all of this for Android too. So anything that they point out, "Oh, well, Android's like this," well, I actually know the exact thing behind that. So I try to educate myself as best as possible, and I just wish iOS users would do that more. But again, I feel that if iOS users did do that more, then they wouldn't be iOS users. And that's just one rant that I had to say that because I had so many when I did all the iPhone stuff, the Galaxy S3 recently, and all those comparisons. It was just so frustrating because all of these iOS users were just trying to talk all the smack, and yet they had no idea what they were saying. Like, I still have people think that the iPhone 5 is the world's thinnest phone when they had to detract that themselves. I've had iOS fans think that iOS is more stable, and they don't know anything like that. They just, "Oh, well, my iOS has never crashed." I guarantee your iOS device has crashed. And it's just certain things like that really kind of uh, really annoy me. And sometimes I'm just like, I look at my phone because I try to get all the emails to my phone, and then reply to it later. But these are things that I definitely just it really annoys me, and I sometimes I respond to it. So sometimes I just think it's funny, like when people are like, "Oh," like one great thing was like, "Oh, you realized that without the iPhone there would be no Galaxy S3," and I was just like, "Well, you realize without Samsung there wouldn't be an iOS device." And the reason behind that, of course, is that Samsung has made parts for every single iOS device since the iPod Touch. And the iPhone. And don't get me wrong, Apple has tried to do it without Samsung. Apple has tried very hard to do it without Samsung. And every time they do, no other company can either make their screens as many as they could, no other company can make their processors as quickly as they could. So they've tried, but they've always gone back to Samsung just simply because Samsung can mass produce better than most companies. So that's just the thing. When they try to do with LG, when they try to do with Sharp, when they try to do with Sony, they just can't mass produce as well as Samsung can for those particular parts. So yeah, I wanted to rant on that. I just felt like I had to, and I wanted your guys' feedback. My followers. I'm sure I'm gonna get some iOS users trolling on this and be like, "Oh, well, da 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 da," try to talk some mess. And please, before you leave your comment, do your research. Do your research. Please do your research. because it's so idiotic when I hear things that aren't true, are inaccurate, or anything such as that. So please do your research, and then feel free to leave a comment below. All right, guys. Hope you like this. This has been RICKY, the Android guy.